terrorists who cruelly gunned them down did so for one reason and one reason alone. He wanted to kill Jews.
From Washington, D.C., I'm Allister D'Souza. This is Washington Watch, a weekly roundup of the biggest stories from the United States. Today we come to you live from outside the D.C. Jewish Museum, where a young couple was fatally shot here behind me. We have full coverage, including the latest on the investigation. Dozens of Jewish organizations around the country have called for more security. We'll have all those details coming up, but for now, the headlines. 31-year-old Elias Rodriguez has been charged with first-degree murder. After two Israeli embassy staff were killed in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday night, one of the charges carries the possibility of a death sentence. Police say Rodriguez shouted "Free Palestine" as he was arrested. The two victims who were shot were to be engaged just next week.
Harvard brought these consequences upon themselves. They have promoted and allowed violent activity on campus.
Foreign students from India and other countries studying at Harvard could be sent packing. The Trump administration has blocked Harvard University from enrolling new foreign students, with existing ones needing to transfer to other colleges or risk losing their status. Harvard is suing the Trump administration for a second time in less than 24 hours. President Trump has accused the university of failing to tackle anti-Semitism.
And it has to be responded to.
Yeah, sure.
Let me see the articles, please.
A stunning confrontation in the Oval Office. President Trump made unfounded claims of genocide against white South Africans as he provoked the country's leader. Despite the ambush, South Africa's president remained calm as Trump used props and played a lengthy video to prove his point.
The bill is passed.
A major political win for Donald Trump. U.S. lawmakers narrowly passed a Republican budget bill by a single vote. Democrats say the bill gives large tax cuts to rich Americans while pulling back on food assistance and health insurance for low-income citizens. The bill still needs Senate approval, with some Republican senators saying they want to make changes to the bill. In his latest jab against Apple, U.S. President Trump says the company will have to pay a tariff of 25% or more for phones made outside the U.S. He says they should not be made in India or anywhere else. Meanwhile, Trump has threatened the EU with a straight 50% tariff after complaining that trade talks have stalled. Our top story: after two Israeli embassy staffers were brazenly shot here outside the Jewish Museum in Washington, the U.S. Justice Department on Thursday charged the lone suspect with 2 counts of first-degree murder, as well as murder of a foreign officials. Now, the Justice Department has called the killings a targeted act of terrorism. So let's take a look more about what we exactly know as far as the couple go. Who exactly were they? Aaron Luchinsky is an Israeli-American citizen. He was 30 years old. Sarah, his partner, was 26 years old. They were both going to be engaged in the next week or so. In fact, Aaron had bought Sarah a ring, and when they walked out from this Jewish museum on Wednesday night, that's when they were shot at. Now, we also need to tell you about how things actually unfolded that day. The suspect that we were telling you about, Elias Rodriguez, what exactly did he do? Well, he actually bought a ticket to an event at this museum that was to happen on Wednesday night. He bought that ticket just about 3 hours before that event could begin, and it was here that he paced back and forth on the street before seeing a group of 4 people. He then opened fire on 2 of them, Aaron and Sarah, and they were the ones who were killed. He fired multiple bullets against them or on them. Let's get you more on this story. We are now joined by Sarah's friend, Allister D'Souza. She joins us now from Israel with more.
Hello.
Elliot, if you can hear me here, firstly, so sorry for your loss. A terrible tragedy here. Can you tell us a little bit more about Sarah? What was she like? You've worked with her, you were friends with her. Tell us a little bit more of the kind of individual, the person she was.
Well, I met Sarah. She was my colleague first and foremost. I'm a lawyer and I work on, ever since the October 7th terror attack, I've been collecting the evidence in regard to the conflict-related sexual violence that occurred that day and in captive. And Sarah was my counterpart in the embassy. She was the one who was dedicated to bringing these voices, these testimonies that I have gathered to stakeholders, to lawmakers in U.S. government, Senate, State Department, and all that. So that's how I met her. I spent many hours with her. She was an enlightened person. You can see
Well,
in the pictures. Um, and
when was the last time you spoke to her? Did she tell you about this potential engagement that may have been in the works next week?
No, and I have to say that from what I understand, she didn't know about the engagement either. He bought a ring, he didn't yet propose. So it's, another level of tragedy here. No, I wasn't aware that they were to be engaged.
Indeed. Indeed, very, very hard here. Elliot, what about this whole incident? Of course, extremely shocking, very tragic. What is it that disturbs you most about what happened? Are you scared for other friends and colleagues that are here in the United States from being targeted as well?
Yes, what is infuriating with this incident, that it was no surprise. And I'll go further and say that the next anti-Semitic murder is also shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. It's just around the corner. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. This is a peak of a long, very, very violent, very, very, a threatening series of events and protests and expressions and actions of violence in the United States, but not only, all over the world, where the spilling of blood of Jewish people, of Israeli people, is something that has been normalized, has been there's no, in the name of a politically correct and the different freedoms of rights and protests, violent expressions and violent actions are being standardized. And so we shouldn't be
Right.
surprised by this next level of violence that has been taken the life of my friend and her partner.
Once again, very sorry for your loss. That was Elliot. She's joining us from Israel there. She is the friend of one of the deceased, the victim, Sarah Milgram. Let's move on now. Let's now take a look at how this, again, unfolded in terms of the specifics as far as the weapon that was used. Rodriguez, who has been arrested, flew into D.C. from Chicago with the very gun he used, and the couple, he legally owned that gun, a 9mm pistol. Now, earlier in the week, Rodriguez carried the gun on the flight from Chicago, where he came from, to D.C. in his check-in luggage, declaring it with the necessary paperwork. There has been widespread condemnation to the attack. Let's listen in to some of those voices now.
Yaron and Sarah weren't the victims of a random crime. The terrorist who cruelly gunned them down did so for one reason and one reason alone. He wanted to kill Jews. And as he was taken away, he chanted, "Free Palestine." This is exactly the same chant we heard on October 7th. I say to President Macron, Prime Minister Carney, and Prime Minister Starmer, when mass murderers, rapists, baby killers, and kidnappers thank you, you're on the wrong side of justice.
The evil of anti-Semitism must be eradicated from our society. I spoke to the Attorney General this morning. The Department of Justice will be prosecuting the perpetrator responsible for this to the fullest extent of the law. Hatred has no place in the United States of America under President Donald Trump.
The president and the attorney general have both indicated that, in cases where the death penalty is warranted and seems appropriate, we will use it. It's far too early to say whether that is the case, but this is a death penalty eligible case.
We're now joined by former FBI Special Agent Kenneth Gray. He has decades of experience in national security investigations. Gray is currently a criminal justice lecturer at the University of New Haven. Kenneth, thank you so much for your time here on Washington Watch. What, according to you, is one of the most disturbing parts about how the suspect, Allister Rodriguez, operated?
Good to be with you, Allister. So I think the fact that this was such a banal attack, that is the banality of this, that Rodriguez did not know either one of these victims. He was just looking for Jews to shoot. He crossed the crosswalk behind you, went past them, turned around and shot them from behind, and then waited there. He dumped his backpack and weapon, and then went to the museum and waited and turned himself into police. And so this was an act that he wanted it known that he was doing this act, and he was doing it for Palestine. He wanted to make it known that he was doing this because he wanted to be able to say "Free Palestine" after this occurred.
Right, Kenneth, now the shooting is being investigated as a hate crime. Officials saying that more charges could be coming, including that of terrorism. Given what you've seen so far, would there be a strong case for those terrorism charges to be laid?
So I think they could very easily make a case that this is a terrorist act. He's carrying this out in furtherance of an ideological or political motivation. And so you could make this case that it's terrorism, but these type of cases are often pursued as hate crimes instead.
Right, there is CCTV footage that was outside the museum here, and that CCTV evidence shows that how the suspect actually operated. My question here is, how watertight is this case, given that we have all this footage, all this evidence of it happening and being recorded on closed-circuit camera?
Well, you've got all the elements of the crime. You have the weapon. You have this statement by the shooter himself saying that he did the shooting. You have the forensic evidence, and you have eyewitnesses that saw this occur. And you have the recording. So with all that put together, this is a very, very tight case that should be easy to prosecute. And we will see whether or not they will move towards the death penalty in this particular case.
Do you see a scenario, very quickly here, very few seconds with you, Kenneth, do you see a scenario where Rodriguez's lawyers perhaps say that he was not in sound mind?
They could make that statement. He has a history of being an activist, a left activist, And so this is in keeping with that left activist type mentality. But nonetheless, they will probably try to fall back on that as to an excuse for him carrying this out.
Kenneth Gray, former FBI agent, thank you very much indeed for your time here on Washington Watch. In other news now, after having to deal with foreign policy and tariff flip-flops from the US, it now seems that world leaders have a new problem. Donald Trump's televised Oval Office takedowns. The latest victim this time is South Africa's president. This report explains the details of the tense meeting.
Because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
It wasn't a repeat of the fiery clash between US President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky. But the tense meeting between the US leader and his South African counterpart was nothing short of dramatic.
Turn the lights down. Turn the lights down.
President Trump gave President Ramaphosa a warm welcome, but that was the end of the niceties. Dimming the lights of the Oval Office, the US president confronted his South African counterpart with explosive false claims of white genocide, land seizures, accusing him of enforcing anti-white policies and even an anti-American foreign policy. Trump even played a video of far-left politician chanting a song that included the lyrics, "Kill the Farmer." Ramaphosa and his delegation watched in stunned silence. But that was not all.
That we've just seen on the screen. I don't know. Look, these are articles over the last few days. Death of people. Death. 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 Horrible death. Death. I don't know.
While Ramaphosa had hoped to use Wednesday's meeting to reset ties with Washington, he did not take what many saw as a dressing down by Trump quietly. The South African president pushed back against the accusations, insisting they were not true.
Let me clarify that.
Yeah,
Let me clarify that, because what you saw, the speeches that were being made, one, that is not government policy.
The meeting highlighted the widening fractures between Washington and Cape Town, which is at an all-time low, with Trump having cut all US assistance to South Africa and welcoming several dozen white South African farmers to the US as refugees. This meeting was yet another example of the new normal in the world of politics. The Hunger Games at Trump's Oval Office, where the more vulnerable a country is on the global stage, the more hostile their reception. World leaders must now decide whether to enter the historic room and accept their fate or fight back and perish.
turn the lights down.
Disha Bagchi, NDTV World.
In an escalating battle with Harvard, the Trump administration is halting the university's ability to enroll foreign students. Not just that, current students would need to transfer to other colleges or risk losing their status. Trump's latest move puts roughly 800 Indian students currently enrolled in the university at risk, with no clarity on the impact on long-term doctoral or PhD programs, adding yet another element of uncertainty for international students after the administration abruptly went ahead and made several decisions against Harvard, like withdrawing funding from Harvard as well. Now the Harvard University has sued the Trump administration for the second time in less than 24 hours, calling the move perilous for international students. Let's take a closer look at this story. Now we're joined by Harvard University Professor William Kirby. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. But before we actually come to you, let's listen into some of the voices from the Trump administration on this ongoing face-off with Harvard University.
This program has been in place for a very long time. These policies have been in place for a long time, and Harvard brought these consequences upon themselves. They have promoted and allowed violent activity on campus. They have allowed anti-Semitism, participation with CCP and Chinese infiltration and influence on their campus, and they haven't protected their students. So we have given them multiple opportunities to share criminal activity with us, backgrounds on these students, to let us conduct the oversight into this program that is our responsibility, and they have refused to do so. So today I sent them a letter that said they will no longer be allowed to participate in this student exchange visitor program.
President Trump has spoken to quite often, that we have an interest as a nation for these universities that are supposed to be the gold standard to actually deliver people who are educated and can function in society and on campuses that encourage a learning environment as opposed to one of left-wing activism, where you have individuals leaving the university level in this country.
Let's get more on this with Harvard University Professor William Kirby. William Kirby, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Washington Watch. Professor Kirby, it's certainly gotten a whole lot worse for Harvard. How worried should foreign students be about the Trump administration saying that current international students at Harvard could potentially lose their status?
Well, we are doing everything possible and immediately to ensure that that does not happen. We believe, as President Garber said in his letter to the community today and in the lawsuit, that this is an unlawful act on the part of the American administration. And I see it as a remarkable and dangerous weaponization of every aspect of government, Homeland Security, Department of Education, in order to promote a political agenda to decide what is taught at universities, who can be taught at universities, and indeed, at the end of the day, who can teach at universities. It is a very, very dangerous moment for American higher education, and yet it is one in which I think the values of American higher education will, at the end of the day, be upheld, and I'm extremely proud of Harvard and its commitment to standing by its values.
Professor Kirby, what happens, we spoke about students who are currently in Harvard, but what happens to the hundreds of students perhaps who've been accepted into Harvard and might be soon making their way across the world to come to the university? What should they do? What is the advice you're giving them at this point in time?
The advice we're giving them at this point in time is to assume that they will be able to come. We believe that the merits of our case are very, very strong. And, if there were, many of our schools have already talked before this recent edict by the Trump administration of those students who could not come, of deferring them for a period of time, but certainly not canceling their admission. Universities are the strongest universities in the world, and Harvard happily is among them, are strong because they are international, because they are open to talent from all over the world. Any university today that is not open, for example, to the extraordinary talent of students from India will be hurting itself and will be diminishing its own role in higher education. And so, we have this remarkable attack.
Harvard has sued, sorry, just running short of time here. Harvard has sued. Sure. Do we know when we might potentially expect some kind of stay from the courts that might get some clarity for students, current students, and future students as well?
I think we can expect Harvard to request a very quick judgment and injunction on this matter. The other matters regarding funding cuts and so on, that will be heard early in the summer in court. That date has already been set, but I expect that there will be an earlier date on this. The reason why to take this so seriously. Go ahead. I said the reason to take this so seriously.
Time for one last question here. At the heart of this latest row, Professor Kirby, is the demand for Harvard to provide details of foreign students who took part in that Gaza protests and maybe other things that they've been pulled up for. When will Harvard fulfill this demand of the Trump administration and hand that over and perhaps help this standoff subside a bit?
Harvard has handed over extraordinary amounts of information to Homeland Security and other parts of the administration on the nature of our student population. There are aspects of that are guarded by privacy laws in the United States that we are not allowed to share. And there is no evidence that we have of criminal activity on the part of those who protested openly in a country in which there is still, and I say it optimistically, freedom of speech.
Just to be clear before we let you go here, Professor Kirby, you're not going to hand that information over.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the university has handed over an enormous amount of information, but the amount that the government has requested within 72 hours is ludicrous. It's a pretext for a political attack. That's all it is.
Professor Kirby from Harvard University, thank you very much for your time. And with that, we need to wrap it here on Washington Watch for all the latest news, including the latest developments of that shooting here outside the Jewish Museum in D.C. Stay tuned to NDTV. I'm Allister D'Souza.